Joe, Alabama and Oklahoma yesterday, I did not see this one coming. I got to be real with you. Not even remotely close did I see this one coming. But Alabama falls 24-3, and their expectation of the playoffs pretty much dwindles here. Your thoughts on how the game went?
Oklahoma fans are going to hate that I'm phrasing it like this, and frankly, I don't really care. Oklahoma didn't do anything exceptional. I saw the ugly version of Alabama that cost them early on in the season. This is my biggest takeaway. I saw a team that was not playing successfully against the run to the point where they were tackling too high. They weren't finishing through ball carriers. There were a ton of broken tackles. They were missing simple blocking assignments on a lot of plays where they needed just hat on a hat in order to produce yards in short area situations. I think that the lack of effort and poor play by Alabama was summed up by the shitty effort on that screen that was picked off the first interception that Milroe had, where Prentice is just standing there when he's supposed to be blocking a guy. He just stood there and just kind of gave a light little shove and then watched Oklahoma's defensive back take the ball back. I forget who it was who picked that ball off, but this game is exactly the shit that I talked about early on in the year after the Vandy loss, after the way that they played against Tennessee. Them being in their first year under Kalen Deboer keeps rearing its ugly head. And Deboer, it's too late in the freaking season to be making the same mistakes. You played great against LSU, you had all this freaking momentum, and you reverted back to the same shitty product. How? That is on Kalen Deboer.
I'll tell you how. You ready?
Okay. Yeah.
This is what happens when you have a coaching change and your depth leaves the building. Meaning, okay, he is not, meaning DeBoer, he is not the only one that this has happened to. I remember the SEC West champ in 2022 having this same exact problem. They did not have the depth. I'm going to push back. Oklahoma did something more than one thing exceptionally well. You want to know what it is?
What?
They lined up and ran it right at Alabama. Jackson Arnold had 25 carries. 131 yards. Joe, they kept running the same plays over and over and over again, and it did not matter. For the first time this year, I saw Oklahoma saying, listen, we have 5 wide receivers that are hurt. Jackson Arnold, buddy, your stock rises for me because you didn't have the dudes and the player. Joe, they had their top 5 wide receivers are out. Okay, that is insane. They said, Jackson, we need you to run the football to win a football game. If you do that, defense is going to step up for you. Not only did he do that, not only was he a selfless player, not only did he do something for the team that's not his strong suit, okay, not only did he put his head down and get tough yards after tough yards after tough yards, and Alabama got gassed, Joe, they held on to the ball for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of time of possession. They lined up and whipped Alabama from start to finish. You can say whatever. We can say, Joe, one team cannot literally throw the football. We saw that in Jackson Arnold being 9 of 11 for 68 yards. They cannot throw the ball. They have no weapons on the outside. There's nothing that they can do. And you knew that coming in. You knew it. And you got pushed around. You were out of assignment. You were out of gap scheme. You weren't making the right plays. And, Joe, I know a lot of Bama fans want to put this on DeBoer. This is a depth issue. When you're trying to roll in defensive tackles and you don't have the depth, you don't have the guys in the recruiting class because so many dudes hit the portal, it was going to rear its ugly head. Now, I thought that they would get through it. I didn't think Oklahoma could do it or Auburn could do it to them. But here we are. By the way, same exact thing happened to A&M yesterday, and we'll talk about them in just a moment. Boy, that Auburn War Eagle at night. This is the 3rd straight year, Joe, that this has happened. I'm just going to throw that out there. But it was the most selfless game I'd see a quarterback play all year.
Yeah, I give Jackson Arnold a lot of credit for the way that he stepped up because you're right. They couldn't throw. One
more point before you go. Can I say this?
Yes, go ahead.
Jackson Arnold did everything I thought Jalen Milroe would do.
Yeah, if you blindly showed me 2 stat lines, I would have pointed and said that Jackson Arnold was Jalen Milroe. I mean, you're right. You're 100%.
Jackson Arnold had a bad day, 11 of 26, 164, and 3 picks. That's who we would thought it would have been.
I think you're very, very correct, though. I think that a lot of the first year headaches of this being the beginning of a new regime at Alabama, it's all visibly there. And I see a lot of people jumping in and saying that this is the Schula era. This is basically what this is going to turn into, and it's not going to end well.
Nick went 6-6. Well, Nick had to rebuild it, but you had 39. Joe, they had 39 players that transferred.
Yeah, I think it's fair to criticize Kalen Deboer for the way that they're finishing this year and likely missing the playoff, and at the same time still being willing to be patient. Like, we got to give the guy three years before we can jump to the conclusion that he's not good enough to coach in the SEC. Because I've seen a coach that has produced some immaculate results. The way that they played against LSU and Georgia for the first half of the game before they almost let Georgia win the game, those are performances that are reflective of that's what the high can be, where you're dominating offensively your opponents. But the problem is that they have to be more consistent. And the way that you establish that consistency, like you're talking about, is they need to develop this roster. They need to go and get more guys. I know that is such a blanket statement that we throw out there a lot, but DeBoer needs to finish this recruiting cycle strong. He can't over commit to the transfer portal, but needs to have a nice building block transfer portal class. It's all going to come down to the next 2 years. What happens in recruiting? And if there's a slow, gradual regression year over year on recruiting, then we can start sounding the alarm, but it is way too soon in my eyes.
I will say this. I did think he vastly got out-coached. Venables had him in the blender.
Yeah.
Very much in the blender.
100%.
Joe, I agree with everything you said about DeBoer. You need to give him 3 years. He needs to rebuild some things. The problem is that I didn't feel like that he put Milroe in favorable situations either. Like, they kept trying to run.
It was very forced. It was very forced.
Correct. I felt like DeBoer last night tried to fit Jalen Milroe into his system versus his making a system and doing what he needed to do best for Jalen Milroe. That's how I felt. If they're trying to make you one-dimensional, then, Joe, quite honestly, you got to line up and run the football. You got to 3 yards in a cloud of dust this thing until they break. You have to. After the second interception, I know it was the pick six, but after that, it's not as if that you didn't have a whole second half of football left to be played. You completely got away from running the football. You completely pressed, okay, and you did not think that you can get back into the game. The Ryan Williams fiasco. How did you get down in the red zone? Well, you ran the football. Now, there's something that's I'm never going to blame DeBoer on. You're having too many penalties in clutch situations. You were undisciplined during Saban. Now I see fans, that's ain't the Saban era. Bullshit. Saban last year and this team last year was 130th in the country in penalties.
We literally talked about it every single week.
Every single week. That's a player problem. That's something that DeBoer inherited. So players got to correct that. Coaching, if Nick can't do it, I don't know what to tell you. But, Joe, there comes a part where I got to continue. I got to throw this back at you. I tell it to you like once every other week. Brother, we see something in these upsets this year. It's the same story every single week. One team that we think that's going to go into the game and win, the team that upsets them, what do they all three have in common? They're winning the time of possession, they're running the football at a better clip, and they have fewer penalties. Like I think of South Carolina, okay, against A&M. I think about what A&M did against LSU. I think even going into the Big Ten, there's not a lot of upsets. But what did Ohio State do in the final win against Nebraska to win? Well, Joe, they had a drive where they ran the ball for 50 yards. There are things where, Joe, we have gotten so enamored with our system fitting a different style of quarterback. Instead of today's coaches, I feel like so much run the ball.
I agree.
Run the ball. We have got, and to your point, I'm going to not clown Notre Dame on this. This is why I thought Marcus Freeman, as an example, has started to learn from his mistakes. And let me tell you why. A new coach coming into a new situation with a new regime. I felt like Marcus had got away from running the football. Kalen Deboer is going to have to learn very quickly. Joe, in this league, if you don't line up and run the ball for 3 or 4 yards and play in a cloud of dust, there's too many good athletes on the line of scrimmage that sometimes you got to get those tough yardage. Last thing about DeBoer. He did this already in the national championship game where he got away from running the football. Hey, you're just playing against better defensive lines. I'm with you. I agree. He's got to get depth. He's going to have to learn, though, that at some point you just got to line up and start running the football. 4 yards of carry is 4 yards of carry, my guy.
Well, so we're going to talk about this with Ole Miss in a second, too, for this next game. But before we jump there, look, I completely agree. Right. Before we get, I want to carry that into the next segment because that's like my biggest thing with Ole Miss. I want to close out this segment just by saying this was a week where a lot of teams got caught up, and I think that this has been happening for the past month and a half. And I don't know if it's just I don't know if it's from like a recency bias situation that I'm noticing this. Maybe I'm just like forgetting a lot of things. But I feel like in the current NIL era and the transfer portal era, it feels like way more than ever. And Deion Sanders did a really good job of saying this about his team. It feels like a lot of these teams were reading the headlines and looking past their upcoming opponent. So much so that Mike Elko freaking had a Freudian slip. He had a slip in a press conference coming into the game saying that we're not looking ahead to Texas. And then he forgot that he meant to say that they were paying attention to Auburn. Like, that is the fullest scope of this, is that it feels like all of these teams are hearing all these great things about themselves and they're getting all this praise, and they're not just lining up and playing the damn games. Like, that's what it feels like. This was the victim, or not the victim, what was the cause that victimized all these teams this week, is that there were so many teams that just got so caught up, and Alabama is the latest. They didn't look like they looked like they thought they were playing a Pee-wee team.
Florida and Kansas this week, what do they both have in common?
They ran the ball.
Joe,
they had nothing to lose. That's the other thing, too.
I'm telling you, if you can line up and run for 4 or 5 yards of carry and you could just do it religiously, you're going to dominate teams. And like, you're going to – 2nd and 5, dude. I'll never forget Hal Mummy. Hal Mummy was asked when I was coming in, Coach, why do you run the ball on first down every play? Or why do you call a mesh route every on the first play? He goes, because 2nd and 5 is better than 2nd and 10. I never can get that out of my mind in these games, in these situations. All right. Speaking of Ole Miss.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.